Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Awaken the World Live. We, of course, are live right now. It is 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Space, time, and consciousness. Right here in the Awaken the World group. Hello, hello, hello. So nice to see you all. So thought we'd do just a little thought, maybe provoking, in a state of contemplation, or perhaps thought stopping little video on, our concept of time and space and consciousness itself. So when I speak of consciousness, and it doesn't really matter what the definition that you hold is, the definition that I'm speaking of is the ground state of everything in creation, the underlying field that is both manifest and non-manifest, we can think of as the consciousness of the creator, that creative consciousness. And the reason I use consciousness is because that creator was never manifest in any physical way prior to manifesting itself as physical space. The ground state of being, the ground stuff, if you will, of that ocean is God consciousness, the consciousness of our creator. So when I speak of consciousness, that's what I'm speaking of. Now, as I've illustrated in a video at some time in the past, we now, at the level of our latest quantum physics, we no longer speak about particles. We speak about fields. And we know that there is no part of us that is separate from each other because we all exist as manifestations within this field. And yet even our manifestations are subject to the field's properties. And those properties include, if you attempt to destroy something here, the exact same data and material, because realistically, we can think of physical material as data, and it really is data. It's literally encoded light at one level, and at a deeper level, the interaction of this field of consciousness beyond the fields that we are aware of at our highest levels of quantum theory right now. So we no longer even consider particles because we know that the entirety of creation only contains a few particles. Now, you may have heard that there's a whole bunch of different particles out there, but every one of those particles is made out of three fundamental particles. These are generated by the field. And the way that the field interacts upon itself creates eddies, if you will. If we think of that field as an ocean of consciousness, of conscious energy, from which everything arises, we are but eddies in the field. Little conglomerations that arise here, and when they fall here or return back to that field of consciousness, the same arises again. There is no knowledge, no data lost in this process. As below, so above. As above, so below. What does that really mean? Well, it's telling us that if we look closely at our physical world, we can truly understand the spiritual world as well. And it really is on a continuum where you can see over time that everything is mirroring not only itself, but everything else as well. So these fields of consciousness, this field of consciousness that we are and are part of, is one field. Now, we name at the quantum physics level 4 different fields. We have fields such as the weak electromagnetic force and the strong electromagnetic force. That is only because that is as far to date as our technology can let us reach. But I believe over time, as I've witnessed from the past to the present, if you look at our history and the study of physics and how it's evolved from the time of Newton and before, into our theories today that allow us to have cell phones and radio communication and other gadgets that we enjoy and that are very useful to our society when properly utilized, we will come very close to being able to deduce or see this field of consciousness. Now, there's a major problem that's going on in the higher end physics right now. And this is an amazing problem. And it isn't a problem so much as a puzzle. And for me, the answer is quite clear. If you took a square centimeter and evacuated everything from it, so that it was a square centimeter, a cubic centimeter of nothingness. Within that cubic centimeter of nothingness, not only is there enough power to power the entire planet for weeks on end, but when we look at, and we've actually done this in the higher end physics experiments, it's actually taken decades. But just as of late, in 2020, we managed to model what nothing looks like. And when you look at nothing, nothing is quite active. And what we were really seeing is that field that is there even in nothingness. When we've taken everything away, we've put it into a vacuum, there's not a molecule left, that there isn't an atom or a meson or a quark, there's nothing. We still can see this very active field. That is a physical mirror image of the very active field lying underneath that, the field of consciousness of which we are a part of. There is no separation. You cannot be separate from anybody in this entire universe. You know, in physics, they talk about the idea of one particle taking on the properties of another particle because the two of them become entrained. They sit in the same space and they mirror each other. And then if you take one of those particles, and we call that particle entanglement, and these days we understand that particles aren't really it, those are just apparent manifestations. We now simply call it entanglement. And there have been many, many scientific journals and experiments done recently, including by the Chinese, where we've actually been able to entangle particles from the Earth onto the space station. And not just one particle, but thousands of them. Now, what does that mean on a practical level? Well, if you have two particles here, and particle A is you, and you take that other particle, in other words, the same material that is you, those particles, and place it on the space station, the day will come where we will do exactly what happens on Star Trek. See, in Star Trek, the transporter doesn't actually transport anything. It doesn't. It takes the pattern of the being and entangles it with a same set of energy, and then simultaneously destroys the original as it produces the copy, but still the original, in another location. This happens simultaneously. When we entangle a particle here on Earth and we place the other particle on the space station and we do something to the particle here on Earth, there is no time lag. The particle on the space station exhibits the exact same change in behavior as the particle on Earth with no time differential. No time. It literally takes no time for it to happen. Now, this is where things begin to get a little bit more interesting. Because now we're talking about time and space and consciousness. So before we talk about the idea that those two particles affect each other immediately, and what that means for us as beings on this planet, as energetic projections within that field, we're going to take a little walk into the universe of time and space. So if you were the creator prior to everything, you were totally unmanifest, and yet you were everything, but there was no everything. There was just that emptiness we talked about earlier. Remember? That space where we took everything out of it, and yet it's still infinitely active, and yet there's nothing there. We can call that unmanifest, or the unmanifest form of creation, of the creator, sorry. And when we say form, we've immediately boundaryized the creator. In reality, there's no form. The creator was not manifest. And since the creator was not manifest, there was no concept of time. And in truth, there was no concept of space, because no matter where the creator was, it was still there. It was there. It was it. Wherever it went, there it was. It had no frame of reference to look back upon itself. You see, we live in a relative world. Why? Why make a universe of relativity? Why make a universe where if you pop one thing here, there's going to be a pop over there? Why do we do that? Why would the creator create a universe like this? The reason's absurdly simple. Because in order to see oneself, one has to be able to assume an outside point of view. And I say assume an outside point of view because, of course, prior to the all becoming manifest in what we would call the physical universe, that creative being, the essence of all there is, love itself manifest, warms my heart. But it had no viewpoint on which to know itself. It would have been aware of itself, but it could not have done anything to truly know itself. An infinity of time passed because there was no time. And one day, in a magnificent light bulb moment, the creator burst out into ecstatic form, modifying its own consciousness, becoming everything that is and will be for all time, manifesting the physical world, the physical universe of time and space. What is space? We think of space as the opening between 2 points in time. So if I leave my chair and I walk to the bathroom, a certain amount of time is passed, and I've moved in space. And there's a correlation between the time and the space. And yet, time is really about the same thing. So what was the purpose of time? And the purpose of time is that it doesn't exist. It still doesn't exist. We measure it as in little blocks as the space between events. And we call this time to give ourselves some sort of linear structure. But in truth, that structure is ephemeral. It's not real. And the thing that's going to really kind of pop your brain in the most wonderful way is understanding that we are moving through space. And that is what creates the illusion of time. As a matter of fact, you want to talk about magic? We are hurtling through space at insane speeds. If you could drive that fast, I wouldn't even want to tell you the size of the ticket you were going to get. Your car would probably catch on fire. Our solar system is moving through space at such speed that we create a shock wave that roars out tens upon millions of kilometers in front of our solar system. This is a good thing. It's part of the protection for our planetary system. It knocks aside and moves away the smaller asteroids and cuts a lot of the big material out of the way and provides us an immense amount of protection from cosmic radiation and other forms of radiation that are out there. So what do we do with our concept of time and space? Because, of course, we live in a world where everything's governed by time. I can tell you that consciously you do it all the time. Deserve a slap for that one, no pun intended. But you have the ability to end time for yourself in small increments, larger over time. Now you may say to yourself, well, how is that possible? How is that? Because even if I end time for myself, it's still going to go on everywhere else. No, the ticking of the clock goes on, which is a perception of time, but it's not really real. We've created it. And you're so used to living that way that we create a huge amount of problems in our lives by perceiving ourselves as being still in space here and then looking way over to our right perhaps and seeing where we think we're going to be happy in space over there, and there's a time lag. I'll give you an interesting little story. You know, Kelly went through basically 6 years of, being utterly ignored by her family. And it's just in the last 3, 4 months that things have begun to turn around with one of her children. And she's now seeing her grandchild. And I said to her on the first day it happened, I said, so all that time, that whole 6 years, do you have any feeling about any of it? Can you even quantify it anymore? Can you even grip that it's been 6 years, or has that all of a sudden evaporated and right here, right now, you have the relationship with your child again? Time is part of our limited egoic consciousness, and it's only part of that in the way that our egoic consciousness tends to operate on it. The same way it speaks, right? It doesn't speak a foreign language inside your head. It speaks to you in the same language you know, and coincidentally in the same voice that you're used to hearing. when we sit and are amazed at a sunset, when we come into a deep place of meditation, when we are fully grounded and present, time stops for you in that moment. We know this by many experiments on deep long-term meditators, that the very cells of their body don't reflect the apparent age that the driver's license of the person would say. The cells are lagging behind that. They're about, there was a one gentleman where his cells were roughly 20 years younger. And that's because he had brought himself to a place through meditative practices where he no longer thought of time and the conscious effect on his energetic being, his body itself. You are truly a manifestation that lies beyond this time and space. You are part of that field of God consciousness, a one-of-a-kind ripple looking back upon itself, reporting back to itself, reporting back to the Creator, your particular view of creation. There is no time like the present. Literally. Here, right now, is all you have. There is no space that you have to worry about. For we are ripping through space at insane speeds. It's a magical journey on this little ball that we would call Earth. And there is ultimately nothing for you to fear. You are part of that sea of consciousness. You can never be separate. You are never alone. Even though you may perceive you are separate from friends or family, or you haven't seen someone in a long time, you are part and parcel of them, and they of you. And we together are a magnificent one. And we are all entangled. Every single being, every single tree, every single plant, every single expression of God's consciousness is entangled with itself in that dance we would call life. That dance of love, of joy. Namaste. I hope you've enjoyed this little kind of more fun video tonight. Of course, if there's any subject you wish me to speak upon, please let me know. All my love. Have a wonderful evening. Take good care.